Good evening. I don't know. This evening program may turn into an afternoon program at some point. I'm just not sure. When I come in for meetings and revivals and everything, it's late when I get home, and I'm just like, bleh. But we're gonna go ahead and go along with this for right now. The book of the prophet Jeremiah. We're in chapter 2 of the book of Jeremiah, and Jeremiah is preaching his first sermon to the backslidden house of Judah. And he's in Jerusalem. He's preaching in the temple court. He's talking to all the higher ups, the prophets, the priests, and the princes, and then all the people, the higher ups, the well-to-do people, because they were the ones who would have been with the priests and the prophets and the princes, the tradesmen, the merchants, the people who, the big landowners, people who had the big farms and whatnot. Now, we left off yesterday with God telling them through Jeremiah that they acting just like a wild ass, a donkey that runs away, and then she doesn't ask for any help until she's ready to fold. When she gets in trouble, she needs some help, then she hollers. And, that's the way most of us are with God. Like, so many times we don't even think about God until we're in trouble, and then we're like a kid calling out for his paw. Well, Daddy, help me. Yeah, well, you need to establish a relationship with God before that happens. I'm not saying He won't help you. I'm just saying it's good to already know who you're asking to help you. Now, yesterday in chapter 2 of Jeremiah, I'll just bring us up to date in verse 23. How canst thou say, I am not polluted? I have not gone after Balaam. See thy way in the valley. Know what thou hast done. Thou art a swift dromedary traversing her ways, a wild ass used to the wilderness that snuffeth up the air at her pleasure, and her occasion who can turn her away? All they that seek her will not weary themselves. In her month they shall find her. In her month, that is when she folds. Beginning in verse 26, chapter 2 of Jeremiah. Jeremiah's first sermon to the backslidden house of Judah in Jerusalem in the temple court, beginning in verse 26, chapter 2. I'm sorry, verse 25 of chapter 2. I looked at it wrong. Withhold thy foot from being unshod, and thy throat from thirst. But thou saidest, there is no hope. No, for I have loved strangers, and after them will I go. You see, God always puts spiritual wickedness and worshiping other gods and idolatry. He always treats it like fornication or adultery, like a woman turned away from her husband unto another lover. And that's what he's fixing to do here. And it says, God says, is telling them how that they could stay straight and not get in any more trouble than they've gotten. And he's trying to tell them what he pleaded with them before, rising early and sinning late, but they wouldn't listen. How he pleaded with them before to just listen to him, to just obey him, but they would not do it. God would say, withhold thy foot from being unshod. In other words, keep your shoes on. You know, in other words, be ready for your work. But there's an underpinning here of keep your clothes on and do not commit adultery. Don't go neighing after your neighbor's wife like a horse in a stall. That's the way Isaiah put this same thing over 100 years before. You got to remember that God is comparing Israel going after strange gods to a woman committing adultery against her husband. Because God keeps saying, I've been a husband to you, and you've run after many lovers. The whole book of Hosea does this construct. In Hosea, God tells him to marry a whore so that he'll know what God feels like when his people turn against him and worship other gods. That's what the point he's trying to make. And he says, withhold thy foot from being unshod and thy throat from thirst. Well, yeah, if you stay home, you don't have to worry about losing your shoe. You don't have to worry about running around naked if you stay home. You don't have to worry about having something to drink if you stay home. But thou saidest, there is no hope. No, there's no hope for me. It's like, I'm not going to stay married to you, Lord, because I don't like it. I don't feel like you're treating me right. There's no hope for me in you. When we all know that our only hope is in Christ. Christ in you, the hope of glory. That's the only hope we have is in Christ. So there is no hope. He answers that, and then he says, no. God says, withhold thy foot. He says, withhold thy throat from thirst. But you say, there is no hope. In other words, the things that you're telling me to do, God, won't help me. And then this other no here says, no, I'm not going to do it. No, I'm not going to be faithful. No, I am not going to be true to you, God, my husband, is what Judah is saying to the Lord. And if they're not saying it consciously, if they're not saying it out loud, they're saying it secretly to each other, which we find out in the later chapters of this book. Oh, when we get there, you're going to be wringing your hands and going, oh, how could they act like that? Well, how do we act? We turn against the God who made us and then saved us. And then, where are we at today? I go to church service after church service where people don't have any hope. I do have hope, but my only hope is the blessed hope. I don't have any hope in a policy or a program or a politician. I don't have any hope in this world. I'm not even looking for signs of his coming anymore. I'm just listening for a trumpet because it could happen at any time. My only hope is the blessed hope. My only hope is Christ himself. And he's your only hope too. Again, the way this is structured, withhold thy foot from being unshod and thy throat from thirst, for thou saidest, there is no hope. No. It means you're answering no to the commands of God because you say there's no hope in God. And then it says, here it is. I have loved strangers. Last half of verse 25. I have loved strangers, and after them will I go. I remember that old guy, he treated me right, so I'm leaving you, Lord. I'm going to go worship him because I remember one time I prayed for him to heal my ingrown toenail, and he did. These false gods. God told them that they were like broken cisterns that won't hold water, that they had abandoned the living water that he provided for broken cisterns that can hold no water. And they've gone after gods and worship gods that could not profit them. We've been in this chapter several days, and that's what he said so far. I've loved strangers, and after them will I go. I had it better with them. I'm going to run and be with my old former lovers. I'm going to go worship Baal for a while. I'm going to go sacrifice one of my kids to Molech. I'm going to go worship the Ashtaroths and live in the groves and go up to the high places and burn incense and cry over Tammuz and burn incense to Isis, the queen of heaven, and make cakes for her and go up there on the hill and have an orgy. That's what they'll do before this book is over, beloved. I've loved strangers, and after them will I go. As the thief is ashamed, verse 26, when he is found, so is the house of Israel ashamed. They, their kings, their princes, their priests, their prophets, the people he's talking to right now. Charlie, if I didn't say hi already, hi. You had a long night tonight, too. Charlie was at the tent revival. Gayla was playing bass. And he says, you say to a stock, thou art my father, and to a stone, thou hast brought me forth. For they have turned their back unto me. These people have went after their former lovers, their other gods, and have turned their back on the God of glory. They've turned their back unto me and not their face. But in time of their trouble, they will say, arise and save us. When it gets bad enough, you're going to say, Lord, help me. Just like the kid crying for his daddy. It's like when you get in trouble, you gotta call, ask him to help, arise and save us. But God asks in verse 28, but where are thy gods that thou hast made thee? Where's all these gods that you made yourself out of wood and stone and gold and silver and precious stones? You know, where are the high places where you went to burn incense? Where is the groves where you went to worship Ashtaroth? The Ashtaroths, the way they did them the reason they had them in the groves is they would carve out trunks of trees. They're kind of like totem poles, you know, and the American Indians in the Northwest with these totem poles. And they would worship. They had all their gods stacked up on one another, and they would worship, you know. And of course, I spent a lot of time around the Navajos in Gallup, New Mexico, when I was young. And of course, they had the Thunderbird and the Lodge and everything in the Hogan. And they had the Thunderbird, and it was their great symbol, their totem poles. Where are the gods that thou hast made thee? Now let them arise. You know, they're saying, arise, Lord, and save us. When it gets too tough for them, when it gets too bad, when they can't stand it anymore, they will call on the real God. And that's always the case. Because when you're a moment from death, the only thing you can think of is the real God. Because on some level or another, you know He's real and you want Him to save you. You need to take care of that a long time before you get in a situation like that. All you have to do is believe that Jesus suffered and died for your sins according to the Scriptures, and that He was buried and that He rose the third day according to the Scriptures. And the Bible is plain that whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. He never turns anybody down. Where are thy gods that thou hast made thee? Let them arise, if they can save thee in time of trouble. For according to the number of thy cities are thy gods, O Judah. You know, which one of these gods is going to save you? And every town you go to, there's another god that you're worshiping. Some of them worshiping the gods of Tyre and Sidon. Some of them worshiping the gods of Syria, Damascus. Some of them worshiping the gods of the Philistines. And then all the gods that were already in the land. Molech and Ashtaroth and Remphan. That's right, Charlie. No atheist on the battlefield. They're all calling out to God. But he's saying, you got so many gods. You know, which one of them's going to save you? Is it the one that you made out of tin over here and painted with paint? Is it the one that you got over here that you're going to sacrifice your children to? You know, there's a story, and they were fighting. They were fighting with the Ammonites, and they lost the battle. The Ammonites did, and the king sacrificed his own son, his oldest son, who would have ruled in his stead, up on the wall, hoping that their heathen God would have mercy on them and prevail in battle. These aren't gods at all. It's all just a bunch of phony baloney stuff. They can't save. He says, you want some help? Why don't you go around to all your gods that you've made to run after like a lover instead of me, like you're committing adultery against me. You know, the Bible always links spiritual idolatry with fornication, because it is a betrayal. It is a turning against God. Wherefore, will you plead with me? Verse 29. In other words, what are you going to say to me that I don't already know? Hello, dear Beth. I'm glad you're watching. I'm going to tell you about a book. I read a great book. Wherefore will you plead against me? In other words, what are you going to say to me? What kind of lie are you going to make up? What kind of story are you going to make up? You have ripped your britches with me, and there ain't no sewing them up. And then he says, you have all transgressed against me, saith the Lord. And see, even at that, he is willing to save to the uttermost. If they would have humbled themselves, he gives them several different plans during this book of Jeremiah. And there's 52 chapters, I think. It goes on forever and ever. I mean, we'll be in here for a long time. I think I chose this book because I wanted God to keep me alive till I could get to the end of it. Well, it's going to take me a while. But he gives them opportunities. You'll see through these sermons that Jeremiah gives to Judah in Jerusalem, in the temple. You'll see that God will give them all kinds of choices. And I say, well, look, if you'll do this, then you'll survive. I won't kill you with Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar will treat you good. And then another time he says, well, if you'll just come out, like when the city's under siege, if you just come out and give up, I'll cause Nebuchadnezzar to be merciful to you, and he'll let you stay here and plant fields and plant vineyards and drink out of your own well and eat from your own produce. Raise your own herds. You won't be carried away like slaves. All you got to do is just obey. Right up to the last minute. I love this chapter. I preach it a lot. Chapter 45. We'll get there and study it real close. But Jeremiah's assistant, his scribe, his personal assistant, Baruch, he's praying to God and asking for a different job because he said, man, if I keep hanging around with Jeremiah, they're going to kill Jeremiah. They're going to kill me too. And God tells old Baruch, look, you're stuck with the job you got. I gave you that job. You're going to keep doing that job for Jeremiah. So I'll tell you this. Don't wish great things for yourself because they ain't going to happen. But he tells him, he says, look, wherever I send you, I will feed you and I will preserve your life. You see, God always gives us options. It never has to be as bad as it winds up being, as we're going to see it being for wicked Judah because they would not obey. If we do obey, no matter how far things have gone into the toilet, the situation is retrievable on a personal basis with God. He wasn't going to save the country. The country was going into captivity because he had made a promise that it would, and he had written that it would, had caused it to be written that it would. And but that doesn't mean that he won't save and work with individual people, and he always does. He did then, he does now. People who've never read the Bible closely, they will say, well, you know, the Old Testament's about law, and the New Testament's about grace. Well, it's not true at all, not even slightly true. The Old Testament is how God dealt with the nation of Israel through grace. The New Testament is how God deals with the church through grace. Don't get them confused. It's all through grace. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. God bless you.